Siena was the main rival to Florence. These are neighboring cities in present-day Tuscany. They're both urban centers for banking and commerce, and that strong civic pride took on a competitive tone between the two cities during this time. They both um, considered their cathedrals, but also their secular buildings, their palazzi, the public squares, to be markers of that pride. What we're looking at here is the um, Palazzo Pubblico. This is the city hall, the seat of city government, and has this large tower that was a mark of honor for the city, but it also serves a very practical function. These independent city-states, they were constantly having to defend themselves against their neighbors, invading kings and rulers, and so the bell tower was used to sound different warnings for citizens. Here's Siena's cathedral. That is much older than the Duomo, than the cathedral in Florence, still in the Gothic style. And we're comparing it to Amiens Cathedral, the kind of high Gothic from France, and you can see that Italian Gothic has a very different look. It's definitely shorter, more horizontal. The sculptural ornamentation can also include some mosaic or panel painting along with it as well. And when we look at the interior too, there's often a kind, Italians, they have access to different types of stones. So we see a lot of beautiful using different colors of marble as well. So the dark green marble, white, pinks. And we also see a development of more naturalistic sculpture in these cathedrals in the late Gothic period. Here we're looking at, this is the pulpit in the baptistry of Pisa. The Pisa Cathedral is also Gothic. This is another independent city-state. And the bell tower, the Campanile of Pisa, that is the Leaning Tower of Pisa that we all know. I think the best way to go about this is to look at a panel from the baptistry pulpit from Pisano down below and compare it to 12th century Romanesque sculpture, so just from the century before. And we see much more, a much higher relief, much more naturalistic figures interacting in the same space. And the scenes that we have here, there's kind of three scenes being compounded into Pisano's view. So all of these panels around the speaker's platform, they tell the story of the life of Christ, culminating in the crucifixion and the Last Judgment. But here we're at the beginning. We see the Annunciation up above. We see the Nativity here in the central panel. So Mary is actually shown twice. This is continuous narration. And then in the back, we see the Adoration of the Shepherds. Some of these poor shepherds here lost their heads. The crowning altarpiece in the Siena Cathedral was Simone Martini's Annunciation. He was the follower of Duccio, an important Sienese painter who created a huge polyptych for the high altar in the Cathedral of Siena. And then in 1330, 4 more altarpieces were commissioned to complement Duccio's work and to represent scenes from the life of the Virgin, who is particularly important to Siena because she is their patron saint. And so all of these works work together as the kind of high point to adorn the interior of the Siena Cathedral. And we see, typical for Italian Gothic painting, we have a gold ground, so a non-naturalistic setting that really comes from Byzantine painting. Figures against a gold ground is typical of Byzantine work. And we see the Annunciation scene in the center with the two main figures, Gabriel and Mary, and that symbol here, the white lilies, symbols of Mary's purity and virginity in the center. We're going to look at 2 Florentine painters, Cimabue and Giotto, who, again, a lot of these figures are transitioning us to the Renaissance. Um, so I think the best thing that we can do here is compare Cimabue's Madonna Enthroned with Giotto's Madonna Enthroned. Not, you know, so Giotto was a student of Cimabue. They are both highly praised and celebrated painters in their own day, and they both make these huge panels to be displayed on altars in churches in Florence. Look, though, so many similarities, not that much separation in time, but look how Giotto has transformed the space. You know, this throne in Cimabue's work, it almost feels like the Mary, that she's almost going to slide off. It has this kind of funky perspective, and the angels are simply just kind of stacked on top of each other. Whereas in Giotto's work, we see the overlapping of figures, including their halos, to give us a sense of spatial depth. And then we also see here in the drapery of the figure of Madonna, we get that sense of three-dimensional modeling, that there's some weight to this figure. Whereas the drapery in Cimabue is more of a kind of linear matrix, a just kind of pattern of line that doesn't give us any sense to the figure. And in fact, leads to some kind of curious elements here where we think, okay, leg, knee, foot, somewhere there has to be a leg here. Then does it go this way? Does it go this way? Here's the foot. A much greater degree of naturalism in Giotto. And he also takes that and applies that to his work here in the Arena Chapel. I'm sure some of you have been here. I have never been to Padua, and if any of us can go anywhere ever again, boy, I would love to see the Arena Chapel in person. This is a small university town west of Venice. Galileo taught here. And this leading banking family, the Scroveni family, they erect a chapel on the site of an old Roman arena, hence the name here. And they wanted to absolve themselves of their sin of usury, which is charging interest on loans. So they build this chapel to kind of balance out their scales. And Giotto was probably the architect, but then he also, in the interior, he creates this elaborate, entirely frescoed interior. Fresco painting emerges in Italy a lot. It has a lot to do with the climate in Italy. It's warmer, things dry, it's not so damp and dreary. And artists in fresco, they put the pigment directly onto the plaster. The surface of the wall absorbs the pigment as it dries, and the color is fused to the wall. It's very durable. And we see three different subjects here. We have at the top the life of the Virgin and her parents, Joachim and Anna. In the center, we see the life and mission of Christ. And then the bottom register is the Passion, Crucifixion, and the Resurrection. And let's look at this famous scene from that bottom register, the Lamentation. This is after the crucifixion, when Christ's body has been taken off the cross, and we see his closest friends, his closest allies mourning his loss. And we have this whole kind of compendium of human emotion, expression, and drama that is also played out in the angels. The angels are writhing, they're wringing their hands, scratching at their face in disbelief. We also see the disappearance of that gold ground now, a more naturalistic setting, and the angels are foreshortened against that blue sky to give us more of a sense of depth. All right, where am I here? Okay, Gothic in German lands, the Holy Roman Empire. As I said before, many independent states. And here, I think we've talked about kind of different key elements of the historical context depending on where we are in Europe. But I think here in German lands, the most important thing for us to know is there's a change in religious practice, more private devotion, and the emphasis on more personal, mystical experiences, which are in part encouraged by the mendicant friars who begin to spread and establish monasteries throughout Europe. Let's look at Cologne Cathedral. That took over 600 years to complete. I love this photo. So here you see the kind of kind of blah modern train station in Cologne. Right next to that train station is this huge soaring Gothic cathedral. And this is St. Geryon. There's a lot of great Romanesque architecture to see in Cologne, and you can see the jump in scale so well from Romanesque to Gothic, which is just on a completely different scope and size than the Romanesque. Looking at the interior, this is the largest cathedral in Northern Europe. It is taller than Amiens, the tallest French cathedral. Floor to the apex of the vault is 150 feet. And we can also see here that a lot of German Gothic cathedrals, they more closely align with the French models than the English Gothic cathedrals do. This, I just also want to circle back to the Shrine of the Three Kings. This reliquary is in Cologne Cathedral here. All right. We're at Strasbourg Cathedral, another German Gothic cathedral, but I want to focus on these two sculptures on the south facade of Strasbourg, Ecclesia, or the female personification of the church, and Synagoga, the female personification of synagogue. This tells us a lot about, I think, the relationship between Jews and Christians in the late medieval period. Here we see church, upright, triumphantly holding her cruciform staff, crowned, holding the chalice for the Eucharist, Synagoga with her broken lance, holding her law tablets, think of the Ten Commandments, with a blindfold. This says how the church views itself vis-a-vis Judaism, that Judaism is unfulfilled. Judaism is a dead end that Ecclesia then ultimately brings to completion. When we look at synagogue architecture from the late Middle Ages, and there's not many synagogues that do survive, but here we see the oldest functioning synagogue in Europe, this Altneuschel synagogue in Prague, from the late 12th century. And we can see even here on this very small scale, Jews are also using Gothic architecture. Jews were prohibited from building large synagogues, large meeting houses. They needed to build small areas to gather. Often synagogues are built in kind of back courtyards. They're hidden. There's no announcement of the function from the outside of the building. And we see that here too, but nevertheless, we see some buttressing on the outside to support these massive ribbed groin vaults on the interior, these slender, elegant colonnettes that reveal to us that there are the same styles being used by different religious groups, and the same masons worked with both Jews and Christians. All right, we're going to end, we start here with the nun, the monk, and his penis, and now we're going to end with this kind of grim devotional object that was used for prayer and individual contemplation. A vesper built is a small sculpture used to aid in meditation, specifically during the evening prayers that are known as vespers. And it's designed to involve the worshiper in the emotional stress and suffering, the mourning of Mary. Pietà is the Italian name here, and it's the scene where we see of the Virgin Mary mourning the death of her son. We have an emaciated Christ that shows us really the human side of Christ's nature. He is broken, bruised, bloody. His body is awkwardly turned for us to see his wounds. There's a completely different psychology in Germany than England or France. There's more emphasis on the personal relationship to holy figures. There's also more emphasis on the sermon, on the message of religion. And this really shows us that gradual move towards Protestantism. All right, folks, we made it. I look forward to reading your final work. I look forward to hearing from you, and stop by in August and say hi in person, please.